Do you want to pay somebody $300 or more to change the plugs in your ski, or do you want to do it yourself for less than 50? If you are in that second group, tune in. Hey everybody, this is Captain Frank with the Ship's Log. Thanks for joining me again today. It is just about the end of the season here. I've got 98.2 hours on my ski. And if you're familiar with the Yamaha schedule of maintenance on an SVHO, you change the plugs at 100 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and change the plugs today. I just changed the oil a couple of days ago. If you haven't watched my video on how to do an oil change on one of these, I'll go ahead and put a link right here. So definitely check that out if you want to do that. But this time we're going to be doing the spark plug change. So again, all you got to do is buy the plugs. And if you've got all the rest of the tools that you need, it's a job that's easily less than $50. You don't have to go pay somebody $300 or more to do that for you. It's really easy, as you will see. And before we get started, please click that like button below. And if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that as well so that you'll actually get notifications when the rest of my videos come out as well. But let's start with looking at the tools that we're going to need for the job. Okay, so here are the tools that I've got laid out to do the job today. The first thing, of course, is just a standard screwdriver. I am going to need that to get that beauty cover, as they call it, off the top of the engine. So I've also got some dielectric grease. We're going to be doing putting that on the plugs before we put them back in. That'll be on the new plugs. I have some Q-tips that I'll be using to put that dielectric grease on. Of course, I've got the spark plugs. These are NGK. These are the same ones that are in the ski that they come shipped with. There are other ones that will work as well, but I went ahead and chose to go back with the OEM here. And also, I'll put a link down on to where you can actually order those. So I ordered these off of Amazon, but of course you can go to an auto parts store or whatever to get those. But I will put a link to where I got these. This is a spark plug gap tool that allows you to check the gap on the plugs. Now these plugs should already be pre-gapped, and I should not have to adjust the gap. But it's always a good idea to check them just to make sure they are correct before I put them in the engine. This is a 5/8 inch spark plug tool or spark plug wrench. That happens to be the size that these are. So I'll be using that to take them out and put them in. If you don't have one of those, you of course can simply use a 5/8 inch socket, a long socket, of course, that is designed for spark plugs. I also have a 10mm socket because I'll be using those to get the coils out. This is not absolutely necessary, but that is a torque wrench. So there is a 20 foot-pound spec for torquing the new plugs back in. Most people don't actually do that. Most people just make sure it's nice and snug. But if you happen to have a torque wrench and you really want to be exact about that, then you can use that. And of course, I just have a rag just in case I need to wipe my hands for anything. So that is about it. Those are all the tools. Now, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take this beauty cover off. Basically, this doesn't really do anything other than make the top of the engine look good. You could say it actually protects it a little bit as well. Like if there's water getting there, maybe splashes around a little bit, but it's mostly just for looks. So we're going to take that off. A couple of screws on either side. Of course, as you're taking these things apart, you want to make sure that you keep track of any screws or anything that you pull out. So 2 screws, and that just literally lifts right up. So once you've done that, you can see the coils. Of course, this is a 4-cylinder engine. Obviously, not all jet ski engines are 4 cylinders. Some are 3 cylinders, but 4-cylinder engine. So you actually have a coil pack for each of the cylinders right here. Now, you'll see that there is an electrical connection for each one of those coils. It's usually a good idea to go ahead and remove that before you take the coil off. You should just be able to squeeze this tab and it slides right out. Now, if you want to go ahead and just do all of them at the same time, you do one at a time as you do each coil. Doesn't really matter. It's not really difficult, or I should say it's pretty difficult to get them mixed up. So you just pull each one of those off. Now you can actually go in and pull the coil off. This is where that 10mm socket comes into play. So and again, I'm putting these bolts in a location where I'm going to make sure they're easy to find when I'm ready to put all this stuff back together. Okay, once you've removed that, literally the coil comes right off. Okay, now here's the weird thing. It really shouldn't matter which coil goes into which cylinder because they all work the same. But I've actually heard several stories that where people have taken the coils when they're putting everything back together, they've taken the coils and they've just casually put them in a different order. In other words, a coil may have originally been in the first cylinder and they end up putting it in the last cylinder. And it's actually caused the engine not to run quite as well. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why that would happen, but I've actually heard more than one story of that. So, just to make sure, I'm going to make sure that I keep track of the order in which these coils were in. I'm going to make sure that when I put everything back together, the same coil that was in this cylinder, or the coil that was in this cylinder initially, is going to be the same one I put back in that coil when I put things back together. If anybody has any idea as to why that would be necessary, please make a comment down below and let us know what the reasoning is for that, because honestly, I have no idea. But now that we've got the coil out, we're going to go ahead and get that plug out. And again, this is where you can use that 5/8 inch socket, or in this particular case, I have a spark plug tool. I'm going to drop it down in there, let it grab, or if this is too tight, maybe I will be using that socket. Okay, it looks like it just broke loose. Now, of course, they're way down in there, so it's probably not real easy to just reach down in there with your finger and get that out. So one thing that actually might help is if, now that it's loose, if you push the coil back on top of the plug and bring it back out, there you go. So now we have our plug. Notice it doesn't really look that bad, which is great because we don't want to pull our plugs out and see that they're just all torn up and nasty and worn down, because that pretty much means we probably should have changed them earlier. So in this particular case, doesn't really look that bad. It's clearly used, but we basically do the exact opposite to put them back in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the plugs out because then I'm going to show you what to do with that dielectric grease. So let's get the rest of those plugs out. Okay, so we've gotten all of the plugs out now. We're going to prep the new plugs to go in. One thing I want to make sure that everybody is aware of, now we've got basically an open hole down into the cylinders of your engine. So just be careful, depending on what kind of environment that you're doing this in. You do not want garbage, trash, dust, dirt, or anything like that to get down into these holes, because that's basically going inside your cylinders and your engine. So I'm in my garage. There's no dust or dirt or anything flying around, so I'm fine here. But if you're doing this outside, it's a windy day and there's stuff flying around, you probably want to cover these up while you're prepping those new plugs, or before you put those new plugs back in. Just a side note for you. Okay, now when it comes to making sure the new plugs are ready to go in, a couple of things that you should do. Again, they should already be pre-gapped, but it's always a good idea to check to make sure that the gap is still correct. Sometimes they get bent during shipping or something, and you just want to make sure that they are good to go before they go in your engine. For these particular plugs, they should be 0.035 inches. So I'm using my gap tool here, and I just slide it on there. And it's right there at 0.305 inches. So definitely good to go. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is use this dielectric grease and make sure that we've applied it to the boot properly, as well as the plug itself. Now, it does not take a lot of this stuff, so you're not going to be putting big gobs of this stuff in the boot or on the plug. It just takes just a little bit. So I'm going to take my Q-tip, and notice as I'm putting this on my Q-tip, I'm not putting it on the tip. I'm actually putting it on the side of the Q-tip. Here's the reason why. This grease is not meant to go on the actual electrical connection itself. It's not meant to go onto the tip of the plug or to the electrical connection that's inside that boot. It is actually meant to be an insulator that goes around this part of the plug and also just the inside of the boot itself. It's meant to allow the boot to slip onto the plug when you put it back in, but not get stuck. So when it's time to change your plugs later on, it comes off easier. So it's not on the tip of the Q-tip, but it's on the side. Basically, I go in here and I just go around the inside of my boot. So by not putting it on the tip, that means when I do that motion, I'm not putting it on the electrical connection in the boot itself. So this boot is done. I can again put a little bit on the ceramic part of the plug, not trying to put it on that metal. And notice I'm not putting a whole lot. I'm just trying to get just like a little film, if you will. So once you do that, then your plug's ready to go back in. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this to all of my plugs and boots, and then we'll go back over to the ski and we'll go ahead and put them back in. Okay, so I've put the dielectric grease on all of my boots. I've also put it around the ceramic on all of my plugs. So now I'm actually ready to go ahead and put them back in the engine. Now, when it comes to doing that, rather than using my spark plug wrench that I was using before, I actually like to use the 5/8 inch spark plug socket that I have. And the reason I like to do that is because there's actually a little rubber grommet up in there which actually holds onto the spark plug. So what this allows me to do is to put the spark plug down in there. It'll hold on to it. I can slide it in and I can turn it by hand. That's really important, because if you start by using your ratchet and just start turning it with your ratchet, you actually could be crossing the threads and you may not even know it. So by doing this by hand, if it's too tight, don't continue doing it. Back it out, see if you can straighten those threads out, and then start it again. It should turn nice and easy for several turns until eventually, of course, it's going to get tight. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. Okay, that one's nice and tight. So when it's tight, I pull this back out. I take my next plug, and I'm going to do the same thing. Let it drop down in there. Turn it several turns, nice and easy. And eventually, there you go, it gets tight. So pull that out and do that with my next one. So I do that with each of my plugs after they're all in there and I know that they are threaded correctly, then I can go ahead and get a wrench to tighten them up. Okay, last one. Now, once you've gotten to that point, you've got two options. You can actually continue using this 5/8 inch socket, put your, here we go, put your ratchet on and continue tightening it. Now, if you do that, keep in mind, you're not trying to crank this down as tight as you can get it. You want to make sure they're nice and snug, because, but not too tight. If you start cranking on this thing and trying to get it as tight as you possibly can, it's possible that you could crack something. So you don't want to do that. So this is where if you have a torque wrench, then you can actually use your torque wrench. Now in this particular case, 20 foot-pounds is what my torque wrench should be set to, and that is what I have it set to. And my torque wrench standards, 20 foot-pounds isn't really tight. This particular torque wrench actually goes up to 100 foot-pounds. The lowest setting on this one is actually 20 foot-pounds. So that's another indication that, again, you're not trying to crank this down really tight. You're just trying to make sure it is nice and snug. So put that in there. And if you've ever used a torque wrench before, when it gets to whatever the setting is that you want, it'll do a click. Yep, there we go. So, and I'll simply do that with each of them. That's if I can fit it in here. You know what? Well, my torque wrench may actually be too large. Okay, there we go. All right, let's see if I can get this last one. There we go. Now what we have to do is go ahead and put our coils back on top, reconnect those, put the beauty cover back on, and then we are done. So again, I'm making sure that I put these coils back on in the same order. In other words, the same coil that came out of this, or the coil that came out of this particular cylinder, that's the same one that's going back in. So do that, it will slide on top of the plug. I will put my bolts back in. All right. Once that's done, you reconnect all of your electrical connections for your coils. And there's really not any dirt I spilled or anything, but what the heck, wipe the stuff off just a little bit. Now that beauty cover, whoops. Now that beauty cover that some people hate, but I like it because again, it makes things look really good. You put that back on top. You screw that back down. And now you are done. You just saved yourself about $250. And what, 30 minutes of time? That's about it. So of course, the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure it runs. Well, there you have it. Obviously, I don't want to run it for a long time because it is not in the water, and I don't have a water source connected to it, but she cranks right up. She's running really good. One last thing that I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and reset the maintenance counter because, like I said, I just changed the oil, I just changed the plugs, so I go in here and reset, and we are good to go. It'll let me know the next time it wants an oil change, which should be 50 hours from now, and man, we're ready for some more writing. Well, there you go. In about 30 minutes, you can save yourself about $250. Not bad. So think about doing this yourself. It's whether you have a Yamaha, Kawasaki, or a Sea-Doo, the process is going to be very similar. Sure, the plugs may be different, the sizes may be different, but the process is really very similar to this. So it doesn't really matter what kind of a ski you have. So I hope you found this really helpful. If you have questions or comments or suggestions, please make sure you put your comments down below. Please like the video. And once again, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe so you can actually get notified when I have additional videos that are actually going to show up. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy riding.